Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel, Pivot to Inclusion. I'm Dr. Nasiah Cirincione-Ulezi, and I am here with Dr. Scott Herbst, co-owner of co-founder of Pivot to Inclusion, and we have a very special guest today. Miss Stephanie Bergner. Stephanie and I have known each other for well over a decade. We both worked in disability services together, and I have tell everybody I introduce Stephanie to. Stephanie is a wealth of information. She has taught me so much and informed my practice so much while working with people with disabilities in the Illinois system. Stephanie, I am just so honored to have you here today, that you would come and share your experiences with everyone. So before we begin, did you want to share a little bit about yourself with our audience?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always great to talk to you, and I've learned a lot from you as well. So I've very much appreciated the opportunity to work with you for so many years and get to know you. And so I I come from the issue of the topic of neurodiversity, both as a service provider, which I've done. I've been a service provider in disability services for a long time. And so I've been in roles of direct care and direct support in both residential settings and in family homes. And I've also been in case management, and I've been in leadership roles. So I kind of have done a lot of different roles. And then I also identify as someone who has neurodiversity in several different ways. One primary one is ADHD, and that was one that was diagnosed fairly later in life, which happens a lot to women because of how ADHD can present differently in women. So
Ask you a question, Stephanie. Can
yeah,
I interrupt you for one
sure.
second? Now, what you just said, you related neurodiversity to ADHD. Can you give me a sense of what neurodiversity is?
Sure. It's really just, it's a way of thinking about neurological differences. So it's the idea that neurological differences like autism or ADHD are kind of a natural part of the ways humans present, rather than necessarily a problem to be solved, it's not, or a disease, or some of the other ways that a lot of times neurodiversity has been viewed in historically in the culture. And especially like when there's a lot of focus on normal in our culture. And that's kind of so anybody who exists outside of what would be potentially considered normal could fall in that window. So it's typically things like autism, ADHD.
Okay.
Those are the two that I see a lot. I've also seen, though, other kinds of neurological differences like OCD, and I've even seen um, some people define it in terms of some mood disorders, like well, I shouldn't say even disorders. That's kind of like falling back into the medical model myself. But
Yes.
but
Yes.
some people like say anxiety and things like that. So there is some differences within the community in how it's defined. But most people agree that it's things like autism and
Okay.
or ADHD, OCD, neurological, the way neurologically someone is wired
Got it.
is a difference rather than something that needs to be cured.
Got it. Again, that is information that I don't think everyone has. Another piece, Stephanie, and maybe you can clarify this for me, is within the disability community, I'm developing a healthy respect and understanding for the roles of identity and
Mhm.
disability as an identity. Again, I shared with you previously, I sat on this book study and I listened to individuals who have neurodiversity. I listened to them speak, and they talk about people in society, people in their communities kind of making having a disability wrong, or presenting with neurodiversity wrong. And there is a pull at this space and time away from that to really embrace, for a person to embrace all of their identities, regardless of what that is. So
Mhm.
we've talked about people using terms like uh, differently abled and handicapable. And there are some in the disability community who really push back on some of those terms.
Mhm.
Is
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go
oh,
ahead and
that's okay. I'm eager to hear your thoughts.
oh, yeah. In fact, I was going to say, I was going to mention that a word about language at the front end, because of how so many of us who are in disability service providers, providing supports for people, are taught person first language. So person first, then the disability, and that really is something that is taken very seriously as a very important value in in disability services. But a lot of times, what I see in the neurodiversity community and the leadership there is a shift into identity first language. So instead of person with autism, a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people prefer autistic. So something
Yes.
that in one area of disability community, which is service providers, it may be that is considered offensive. I've been kind of scolded for saying that, and I've
Yes.
been saying it out of respect for what people who are on the spectrum tell us, because I don't identify as on the autistic spectrum, then that this is what we like. This is how we identify. So I do mix that up. I say person with disability, but I also will say autistic. And then if I'm talking with somebody and they express a preference, then I'll go with their preference usually. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I love that. Now I'm not sure. Scott, did you have something to say?
No, no,
Okay.
I'm just listening. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, yeah. Can I just like interrupt with questions if I have them?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
Yes, and Stephanie, again, being trained in the field as a special education teacher and a behavior analyst, there was a shift several years ago towards person first language.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the train. In fact, I want to say you and I were working together when we had to go through the DHS training and for individualized person-centered planning and using person-first language. So again, what I have always said throughout my career is I ask.
Mm-hmm.
I ask an individual, what do you prefer?
Mm-hmm.
You tell me what you identify with, and that's what I will use.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any guidance for others around that? Would you subscribe to just asking people?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I would generally ask because I have run into situations where someone definitely prefers one over the other. And, but in a situation where there is nobody to like in this kind of situation, or if I'm talking with a group, like doing a training or something like that, then it's harder because there isn't, unless somebody self-identifies and says, hey, I don't like this, then
Got it.
we we have to kind of make a decision at the front end.
Got you.
But
Got
yeah.
you. Very good information to know. Now I have another question. What are the ways neurodiversities can potentially impact the way someone would move through a community, or just the way they're interacting or being with others?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a hard question because it's so individual, and so that's the main thing, is how individualized it is, and how and that's why a lot of these are spectrum. Um, where everybody's specific needs are different, and um, so yeah, but one of the main things when I think about what I've seen in my career, but and also in my personal friendships and my own life, is one of the main things would be the, a tension between, like a tension in a conflict in the way that diversity like neurodiversity is viewed, or disability in general is viewed, and that is especially when it's inserted into a power structure. So like take a school, or a workplace, an employer, or a parent has more power, and if this is where we were, many of us who've been in the system have worked in the system, have learned the different models, the medical model, which views disability and neurodiversity as a problem to be fixed and something that might need a cure. And it can be quantified based on specific criteria. And there are important things that come out of that. At least there have been for me. So I can't reject that altogether, but it also can be dehumanizing. And then there's, the social model, which is like the way of viewing disability is more about looking at it like barriers, that full inclusion is possible if societal barriers are removed. And whether that's a communication barrier or an access barrier because of a ramp or whatever, it's based on the social network around someone. And then there's the charity model, where there's definitely almost like condescending. Here, let us help you. We've seen this too, I'm sure, especially going back, Jerry's kids, things like that. So it positions people as needy, and then now what we're looking at now is in the neurodiversity movement and in disability in general is the identity movement, the identity model, where disability is viewed in community, is viewed as a form of identity that one can be, there can be pride, and there can be belonging, and there can be political power. That's the other thing, is that in grouping people with the same identity, you can gain political power that way. So and have your needs as a constituency met.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
I've
so,
seen that, Stephanie. I have seen just the organization in the neurodiverse community, the political power
yeah,
that I'm seeing that community is yielding, even as it relates to service providers.
yes, yep,
It's become an increasingly powerful collective.
yes, it has. And so if there's a conflict, if a medical provider, for example, is coming out of the medical model, and that's what they were trained to do, it's not because they're bad or they or they want harm on people or anything like that, but that's what they were trained to do. And so they see a neurodiversity as something to be cured. And here comes somebody who's saying, this is my identity, this is something I value and I cherish and I welcome. I don't want, if you could give me a pill to cure my autism, I don't want it. You keep your pill. I'm good with where I'm at. I mean,
Yes.
and so there are people like who they might say, or they might benefit from different supports to help remove barriers to inclusion, but that doesn't mean they want a different neurological wiring, or that doesn't mean they want it fixed. So there can be conflict in those systems, and then that's when people can get labeled as non-compliant. and those kinds of things where you're not cooperating with medical treatment. So those kinds of conflicts, it can happen too, even within families. So if you look at back when there was the myth that autism was caused by vaccines, by the mercury in vaccines, and that was a myth, but it was a myth that a lot of people believed, and it has been debunked. But in the meantime, parents who were trying to do the best they could, were that kind of conflict. So they were exposed. People were exposed to treatments to try to cure them that were sometimes harmful. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Stephanie, I even remember it was a little bit before my time, but I remember studying about it when I was in grad school. Dr. Beetleheim in the refrigerator moms, when there was a certain point in our history that diagnosis was rendered as a result of cold and disheartened
Oh yeah.
mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently there was some of his research, Dr. Beetleheim's research, that supported this. So I found that fascinating that people actually supported that research, and that's a part of our history.
Mm-hmm.
And I would.
Yeah.
Mhm. So can you talk more about, because I know we have worked together and we have experienced times when people's just natural reactions to things have resulted in these labels of being non-compliant. And when people are angry and their anger turns into aggression because somebody was treating them unfairly, not necessarily respecting their autonomy, as a person who had neurodiversity, it turned into the person with the neurodiversity being wrong or somehow having maladaptive behaviors. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I know we've seen it so much in our work together.
Yeah. It can happen a lot with a lot of different disabilities, but neurodiversity seems to be, because of the differences. Some of the differences can run into that quite a bit, and again, and it returns to the power systems in the power structures, and trying to have people presenting as normal, and that is the goal.
Yeah.
And having people present as normal and having people present as in ways that are easier. And again, this is just because of this is lack of access. So if somebody needs a certain type of support, like some individualized attention in some ways in some areas, then and they're in a classroom with 32 other kids and a teacher who's not a special educator, that can be a problem. And
Yes,
that's especially true for kids who maybe haven't been diagnosed.
absolutely.
And so that's part of it. But also, like things like with communication barriers, if someone has not been helped to have a communication system that helps them communicate, doesn't have to be verbal, doesn't have to be talking, but a communication system where their needs can be heard and then met. Not just heard, but
Yes,
met whenever possible. Met is one of the things that we've talked about in various
absolutely.
settings. Is it's okay for people to get their way.
Yes,
It's okay for people to get what they want.
it is.
And
It is.
yeah.
It's interesting too. As a behavior analyst, what I get a lot of is they just want attention. What?
Right.
It's
I was just going to say
okay.
that.
It's okay to give them some attention. If
Yeah.
they want attention, it's almost like it's made wrong for someone to want attention. And then when we think about, especially in Illinois, Stephanie, and we've been at this for years, the way especially our adult systems are set up, our folks many times that we serve don't get a lot of individualized or even small group attention.
Or meaningful attention that's meaningful to
Yes,
them, that is the kind of attention they desire and want. And yeah, and that's such an important thing, the way attention has been, the desire for attention, because one of the things that can happen is if we teach people systemically, we teach them that seeking attention is bad,
Mhm.
then a lot of people trying to get their needs met may become compliant to that. And so they stop seeking attention,
Yes.
and that can become dangerous because then they're not then we're not, if they don't have a communication system that helps them communicate, or there is no language for what's going on, or a lot of different, or we don't understand their language, because the focus has always been historically on people with differences in expression and differences in language, modifying their language to our needs so that we can understand them, rather than a lot of times us trying to understand them. And if you look at some of the most talented DSPs that you've ever known in SILAs, they were the people who could understand, who could flip that around and understand and understand the person's communication system. And that doesn't mean we don't try to work with somebody on developing communication that can be broadly understood, because that increases access. But
It does.
yeah.
You know what? Let me share, and you might.
Hey, I'm going to interrupt here.
Sure.
Just because I don't know who's watching this. So DSP is direct service
Thanks,
provider,
Scott.
right? And a SILA is a group home,
Right.
like an acronym for a type of group home, right?
Yeah, those darn acronyms.
Like a community-based group home that would just be in the neighborhood, correct?
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Scott. Sometimes
Thank
me
you.
and Stephanie get going and we just.
I get it. You guys are so in the world that
Yeah. Thank you.
So,
That's awesome. Yeah.
You know,
But yeah,
let me share this, Stephanie, because this I believe happened when you and I were working together. Let me jog your memory. There was a man, and he was what we call as behavior analyst, minimally vocal verbal. So he was highly communicative. He had great eye gaze, but his ability to produce vocal speech pattern, he did not have that. And this is where I identified the ableism in myself, and it was a powerful moment. I realized who I was giving my attention to. I was giving my attention to individuals who could vocally and verbally communicate with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember going into the classroom one day and I was doing my hellos to everybody, and I missed him. And he just made a vocalization it said everything. It was like, how dare you come in here and not acknowledge me? And I think about, up until that point, how often we do that.
Mm-hmm.
How often do I just reinforce the communicative behaviors of individuals who can vocally speak back to me, disregarding people who can communicate, but they don't have the ability to verbally communicate. So that was an aha moment, and it really woke me up to how my own ableism really kind of perpetuates ableism across the system, because I'm the behavior analyst. I should know better.
And I've had the same kinds of experiences, and I'm going to tell you, like, the best training I've ever had started to come when I started to expose myself to trainings that were run by people who either like had disabilities or identified as neurodiverse. That conference that you and I went to together in Chicago, those kinds of Illinois Imagines is another great example of that. Is that there is a very strong value for people with disabilities speaking for themselves. And so, and that's when it kind of shifted for me, is going through a lot of those trainings is very humbling for me.
It's incredibly humbling.
Yeah.
Incredibly.
And sad to realize that, but then, it's just, it's kind of a constant growing for me, even as someone within the community, where I caught myself, it hasn't been that long ago, where I was taking a video in an activity, and I noticed that exact same pattern as I was watching it back to kind of clip it to use for something with one of our small groups. And and I saw that pattern in myself, and I'm like, oh my goodness.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness. I've got to see this. I've got to see this before it happens.
Absolutely. But that's why the work around serving the neurodiverse community or anybody with a disability, it's ongoing and it has to be
Hmm.
reflective, you know.
And yeah, and for me, it has to be like not not coming back and saying, like, using it as a weapon against myself, or weaponize, or punishing myself, or saying bad person, but also more of an acceptance of this as a growth process for me, for a lot of different things, and to just be able to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I did that. I'm sorry. That was, I will try to be more aware of that.
Yes.
And thank you for telling me. I did not mean to do that. And to be able to accept that part of the work.
That's the humility.
Mm,
Just really working from a framework of cultural humility and ongoing learning. Because if you step into this space as the expert and know it all, it becomes harder to apologize and accept that you can make a mistake and learn and grow from it. You
mhm,
know, Stephanie, too, and this came up in that book study that we did last night, is the whole issue around neurodiversity, disability, and sexuality. You know, in our work together, that's another challenge that I've seen, is just the general population accepting that people with disabilities, people with neurodiversity are sexual, you know, especially our adults. You know, how many times have we seen it to where guardians are trying to control the sexual behaviors of their adult child with a neurodiversity or other disability?
mhm. Yeah, yeah. And it can be, it can it it can prevent people from having, it can prevent people from staying safe,
Yes.
because it prevents education. It prevents the education that maybe, I don't know, when does it start for people who are perceived as neurotypical, sexual education. And so it prevents formalized, structured education that teaches people
Yes.
about their own sexuality. And so then they can identify if somebody uh, is doing something in a way that they don't like,
Yeah.
and that they don't want, that's not welcome. They can, without the education, they don't have a language for that.
Absolutely. And I've seen it over and over again. You mentioned Illinois Imagines,
Mm-hmm.
which is an outstanding organization, which I've actually utilized as recently as a couple months ago.
Oh,
But
really good.
yes, they came and they spoke to a group of behavior analysts to really help folks understand that, because within our society we often look at people with neurodiversity as not being sexual, and because of that people are at incredible risk of experiencing violence.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of you who don't know, Illinois Imagines is an organization in Illinois that educates about violence towards women with disabilities. And it's a wonderful service. They have visuals, they come out and do trainings, and I will say it's definitely needed. Stephanie, I want to ask one more question. Um, when we think in terms of neurodiversity, how can we help manage or eliminate some of the barriers to full inclusion of family life, of community, school, and employment? that's a
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge issue right now, to get our folks to get folks meaningfully employed. How can we address some of those barriers?
Yeah, I think there's one of the main things, I think, is especially for employers, but also education too, is the belief is accepting the belief that removing barriers can elevate performance and can bring out contributions and gifts, and that there are, when people exist outside of what society considers normal, there are incredible contributions that can come with that. Creative ways of looking at problems, creative ways of solving problems, different ways. Sometimes linear, sometimes sometimes not. I mean, there's just so many contributions. And so the first thing is the belief that accommodations, helping to remove barriers, actually helps elevate performance so that these gifts can come out, rather than the belief that a person seeking accommodations is trying to get away with something or trying to get out of something. And I've seen that a lot with regard to employment. I don't see it as much in the within service systems as much, but I see that, like, I've seen it in some employee situations, employment, and then I've seen it done very well too, where a very talented employee, one of the accommodations was around time. One of the struggles was management of time, and it was an accommodation. And it was an accommodation that was at one of my workplaces that was freely given. I don't think there was any kind of sense that the person wasn't going to contribute that can sometimes come with it. Do you know what I'm talking about with that?
Do.
Yeah.
I
And
do.
so, and that person was a very strong employee. And so, yeah, I've seen that. So with neurodiversity, I think a lot of the accommodations can be around workspace. It can be around sensory kinds of things. So like environment, the ability to manage one's own environment, the ability to manage one's time within the job description, not as a substitution for the job description, but within it. That can a job be modified to allow for this? Yeah, many of them can. Sometimes it can't. So there are some jobs where someone has to be able to drive a vehicle.
Yes.
And that's just a job description that has to happen, or a job duty that has to happen. And so it's not a substitution for doing one's full job. It's the ability to make that happen and to see someone's gifts.
I love that, to see someone's gifts, to really see them, and to
Mm-hmm.
create space and access for their gifts to shine. One of the things that I've seen is people being afraid to disclose.
Mm-hmm.
And can you talk a little bit about when an individual does have a neurodiversity and they're not free to disclose? What could that? Everybody is different, but what does that have the potential to create?
One of the things like that is created in my life is exhaustion. Because and it's not from being denied accommodations. That has not happened. It's just that when people who are neurodiverse try to fit in, and by fitting in, that can mean managing physical manifestations, like sometimes it's like moving the way you move your hands to express. Like I have some of those physical things that sometimes people with autism also have, is and so trying to suppress those kinds of things until I get home. So those kinds of things can be very tiring, and that's just more of trying to come to terms with part of it is internalized ableism. Honestly, it's internalizing a lot of what we have picked up from the culture. It doesn't even have to be related to someone's workplace. It can be related to what they believe, based on what they've seen in culture growing up.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so it can be exhausting. But it can also prevent someone's true gifts from coming out. I
Yes.
mean, it can prevent them from succeeding. It can result in, terminations that might not have had to happen
Mm-hmm.
if there was more ability to modify things.
Yes. Yes. Do you see within that, because disclosure is a big step for some people.
Yeah.
Have you seen people get discriminated against when they do disclose because of an employer's lack or inability to accommodate?
What I've seen, yes, what I've seen is, and this is one of the things that happens when like for me, when I have a neurodiversity, and when I've seen others disclose in situations in my past, and you can then you hear things because people don't always. And so I've seen, what I've seen is like accommodations that are offered, but then the disability then is always the thing that is perceived as a problem.
Oh,
So if there's an issue with some part of a person's performance, if it's a perceived issue, if it's a real issue, um, part of a discrimination is that it can be tied to a person's disability in perceptions. And whether or not it is or isn't tied, that's based in, depending on human differences. Sometimes people just need supervision.
yes.
Sometimes they need accommodations. Sometimes it's a bad job fit. I
Yeah.
mean, people just, people like, I've had bad job fits in my past too. And so sometimes there's a lot of different reasons, but a lot of times if there's a disclosure, from what I've seen, is that it all kind of comes back to, this is how it's perceived. It's
Yes.
related to the disability and or the neurodiversity, and it
Gotcha.
may not have anything to do with it.
Got it. You know, what I really want to know, I've shared with you, Stephanie, Scott and I have embarked on just a very meaningful piece of work in the world to where we're helping others to embrace inclusion. We're helping organizations who are seeking diversity. So, this work and the information that you have shared will definitely contribute to our knowledge. Please tell me as we close, Stephanie, just any closing thoughts that you have as a woman who has worked in the field of disability services for almost maybe as long as I have or longer, 30 years. What is just piece of advice? What's a gem you can leave with us as far as it relates to people with neurodiversities and removing some of these barriers? What advice would you give to community members, parents, employers, professionals?
um, to look for the areas of contribution.
Okay.
Look for the areas where does the person contribute the most. What what does a person tell you? What does the employee or student or whoever tell you is their area of contribution? How do they perceive their gifts, if they know what they are yet?
Yeah.
And um and then work on any kind and accommodations that or removal of barriers. It doesn't even have to be formal accommodations.
Yes.
Removal of barriers that help those gifts come out and help those contributions come out to increase chances of success.
Absolutely. That's what we're all about. Stephanie, I honestly can't thank you enough. And again, every time we talk, every time I listen to you, I leave with something. You have given us such a gift. Again, I thank you. I hope you can come back because you have information on so many topics.
Thank you. I really like what you're doing with I was watching one of your other interviews, and it's exciting.
It is incredibly
You're on.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well,
Yeah, and can I also say thank you? Because Nasi and I were talking yesterday, and I basically like said I don't really understand neurodiversity at all, except as this kind of peripheral thing I'm hearing about in the culture where it's become a thing, right? So really came here today to listen and to learn, and you just really provided some excellent perspective where I can walk away and say, I can't say I understand it, but I definitely have more of an understanding, more of a clarity, more of an appreciation. So really want to thank you for your time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
awesome. 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 Okay, everybody. I am going to say goodbye to our audience, pivot to inclusion. Please like, subscribe, and share. And we will see everybody soon. Bye bye.